This is MITOHACKER podcast. Welcome to the podcast. And I actually welcome Kevin Carr from My Boy Training System. So thank you for accepting my invitation.
Yeah, happy to be here. And it's good to see you, even if we're not in person, at least for the time being. So happy to talk.
So I thought last week we had Coach Boyle as a guest. And that was pretty amazing, to be honest. He's not doing a lot of podcasts, as I understand.
Yeah, no. I think he's trying to utilize his time. I think he's been enjoying the quarantine and being at home with the family. So, yeah, I think he's trying to limit his podcast experiences. So it's good you got him.
Yeah, that's what he told me. And so we're going to, what is your position at the coach operation? Because he has the gym, but he has also the CFSC.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of have three jobs under one roof. So, I mean, I've been at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning as a coach for about 12 years. So myself and a couple of the other guys that are here actively work as managers of the facility with our staff here. So we have about 30 coaches that we manage and manage groups and personal training and things of that nature. And then with CFSC, something we founded as a group, myself, Brendan, Ririk, Michael, and Kevin Larrabee kind of came together to put this idea of the CFSC certification together. So I actively run that company along with Mike and Brendan. And then right next door is my massage and rehab clinic as well, Movement is Medicine. So I have all three of these things kind of going under one roof. So at least I have a lot of things I got to manage, but they're all in one place, so that's good.
Now, for the younger trainers, it seems like functional training was always existed, which we know it's not true. And for many other people, it seems like Mike Boyle always existed, which is also not true.
Yeah.
But your certification is really new, right? I mean, compared to other coach certifications, this is very new on the market. So how do you differentiate CFSC from the others?
Yeah, I think the what's unique about CFSC, it was born out of the practical application that we use education for in our own gym. So in the idea of us putting it together, we really based it around our intern education and what we teach our interns so that they can be effective coaches out on the floor for us. And then we thought, well, why don't we try to deliver that same experience to coaches outside of our facility? And so it was really based out of practical application. And I think that is unique from what many of the other certifications are out there, where, they have you bury your head into a textbook and you might learn a lot of concepts that don't necessarily translate to working with a real person in front of you. So we've always wanted to keep CFSC tied to practical application. And that's why we require a practical and we require a practical coaching exam for those coaches to pass, because anybody can study a textbook, but if you got to show me that you can teach a squat or teach a hinge or like manage someone who can't squat well, that's a skill that applies to a real coaching situation.
Mm-hmm. Now we know that Coach Boyle is somebody who is willing to test things and willing to say that I was wrong and changing his opinion based on the experience and data. So meaning, how do you keep the system fresh and the coaches fresh? Because the system is changing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting experience working here. I always tell people, like, that people look from the outside, but it's an interesting experience when you're actually in it and you're in staff meetings and Mike comes in, you're like, oh, what has he got this week? Right? And he's like, I got this idea. We're going to change this in the program. And then you have to think about logistically, how do you run a business and how do you run a successful program and make these changes on the fly? Because we're like in our staff meeting, like every week saying, okay, why don't we tweak this? Why don't we change this? Mm-hmm. And again, I think Mike's willingness to change his mind is born out of the fact that, we're actually trying to find better ways to train real athletes out on the floor. Right. And so I think if you're not actually training people and you're just talking about things philosophically, it's easy to not change your mind. But when you're actually like looking at a problem on the floor and you're like, how do I fix that? It leads you to be progressive in your thinking. And I think that's why Mike it is so known for changing his mind and adapting, it's because he's still actively coaching at 60 years old. So it keeps the wheels turning for him, and it's good because like we try stuff in the gym all the time, and sometimes we're like, oh, that didn't work, and we got to throw it out and start over. And sometimes we do it, and we end up making big changes in the program. So I mean, that's I think why the gym has been so successful.
Okay, so let's say you are a fairly young coach. I mean, and we know that young coaches, they are full of ego. Can we say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and I was working with your team, I think with most of your guys, and I haven't seen any ego issues, to be honest. But is it, when you're that young coach, is it difficult not to have the ego issues?
Yeah, I think we try to almost get it out of them during their internship. So like the coaches you end up meeting, we got rid of the ones probably that didn't fit within the characteristics that we wanted. We almost beat it out of them, right? And then the ones that come through the internship, they've adapted to our system and the way we want them to think, and their ability to learn new things, right? Because when we get a new group of interns in to come work for us, you get a whole handful of them that think they know everything because they went to college for exercise science, but they've never coached anybody. And then you start to see the ones that had, like, I remember when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. And like, you start to have all these learning moments during your internship in your early coaching years. And I remember learning that you had to be adaptable if you were going to survive here. So hopefully the culture that you can build where it's a growth mindset, where these people want to learn and get better, it develops great coaches, really.
Is it a big issue there to teach people the critical thinking, right? So that's what so if you want to have the right answers, you have to ask the right questions. And we have these coaches, the very young coaches, they say, like, you have to question everything, which on itself is already a very interesting approach, because then I question your statement too, which is questioning everything.
Yeah.
Right? So where is the line? That's number one. But critical, isn't critical thinking is what you are teaching to your coaches?
Yeah, you want to get coaches, teach them how to have a good filter for information, and then how to filter that, most importantly, into what our daily practice is. And I think now with the internet, with there being so much information out there, like through social media and through Instagram, all these things, it's hard for people sometimes to filter and make intelligent decisions about what they see and think about, does this actually apply to what I'm doing? Like, you could go to all these courses, but if you go back on Monday and it doesn't help you do a better job with your clients, then it's not really that useful. So you have to be critical in how you take in information and think, how do I apply it to make these decisions? Sometimes you get these young coaches who, you're right, they haven't applied any critical thinking. They just maybe learned what was in a book and then thought, like, oh my God, how does this actually, change what I do practically? So you're right. It's good to question things, as long as you're, taking those questions and thinking, okay, again, how does this affect my daily practice? I think everything has to come back to practical application.
Now, we are talking about functional training, and functional training means so many things for different people. So can you just summarize that? What is your guys' opinion about, so what is actually functional training?
Yeah, it's like functional training is one of those things that's kind of like a misunderstood topic, right? And like, even just like saying the words sometimes conjures up images of like a trainer with their client on a Bosu ball, like with a bunch of bands and swinging around things over their head like a crazy person. But in its most simplest, I think functional training is purposeful training, right? Like you're selecting exercises with the idea of fixing or creating some sort of intended outcome. And you're selecting those exercises based on the function and structure of the human body, right? So like, it's purposeful. We're not just building mass and hypertrophy for aesthetic reasons, but we're choosing a kettlebell swing so we can develop eccentric load in the hamstrings, and we can help translate that to jumping and running sports. Like, there's a reason why you choose everything. And much of traditional training, as you see, or like bodybuilding based training is aesthetic based, or, because it looks cool. We want to make choices that are thoughtful and purposeful. And I think that's the simplest way to say what functional training is.
So is it an acceptable statement to say that functional training should have at the entry point and many other points, maybe some kind of filtering system or screening system? And also it is very difficult to progress forward without understanding the functional anatomy of the human body. Would you agree with this?
Yeah, you need a funnel to put people into the program, right? Like to understand, can they get into the positions you need to absorb and adapt to stress? So having some sort of screening system to say, can they move the way we need them to move? You have to have some sort of movement rubric or standard. And you want to make sure that you have some sort of system, whether that's, SFMA or FMS or some sort of system to look at movements. I think is really, really important to make sure you're making the right choices and that you can progress forward most efficiently. Absolutely.
So in this case, functional training is basically based on the original functions of the human body, right? And we are talking about movements before exercises. So how do you differentiate between movement and exercise for a beginner coach?
Yeah, well, so it's what I always try to differentiate for everyone is like, we're not thinking about, like a bicep curl. We're thinking about whatever natural motions come in sports. So if you watch someone move naturally, or you see someone move in a sport naturally, how can we replicate some of those joint positions in the weight room? And for me, like I always talk to our coaches about, after you learn something like an FMS or an SFMA, like I take people through what I call like a basic introductory workout that I use as an assessment. So like I want to see a hinge on 2 legs, a hinge on 1 leg. I want to see a squat on 2 legs. I want to see a squat on 1 leg. I want to see a push and a pull that's vertical and horizontal. And so like I can get a basic movement assessment to see how do you move under load, how do you move in the weight room, and then I can start to think about exercise selection from there, right? But I mean, we're training humans first. I think we were moving long before we were ever in a weight room, right? So I want to see like what's their basic quality of movement, and then we can think about adding load and picking certain exercises or using certain tools in the weight room. But it has to come back to how they kind of move naturally first.
And also, when we are separating things from exercises and put them into the movement, then we have a lot of regressions and progressions, right? In the same movement pattern. And you guys are known for a huge amount of progressions and regressions. So that took some time to collect them and weigh them in, right?
Yeah, I think it was really something that was born out of us being practical and saying like, okay, this person can't do a deadlift. Where do we go back from there? Okay, they have to hip hinge. Okay, they can't hip hinge. Where do we go back from there? Well, let's make sure they can touch their toes, right? And all of that is a hinge to me, just a different version of that hinge pattern, right? Okay, hey, that person can deadlift well. Where do we go from there? Okay, maybe we teach them to swing, right? So you're having a spectrum that you can move your clients across in the same patterns, so to speak, allows you to be a more effective coach. And for us, we were always looking for ways to just be better at our job on the floor. And that led us to building out this framework of, being able to teach people how to move.
Mm-hmm. We see today a lot of coaches are getting, it's maybe the 80% of the training is about injury prevention. So at the end, they don't do nothing basically, but just, I'm sorry, but that's what I see. So isn't that a problem that we started to be afraid so much from injury, which understandable, I got it. I've been an athlete, been injured, got it. But we got so afraid from being injured, we are not doing anything and not improving anything anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the irony too, is like that the ultimate injury prevention, so to speak, is building capacity and building resiliency. And so like we're trying to fight fragility as much as possible. And the best way to do that is to make someone have a huge capacity so that they can take on more stress. But if we're always so scared that we're working on these low-level motor control and corrective exercises, then we never even get there, right? So I always say with like motor control and corrective exercise, do as as much as you have to do, don't do any more than that. And then we want to start to build capacity on top of those things. And yeah, so I think sometimes you've seen this pendulum in fitness go swing towards physical therapy like really far. And I think, you know, it's good. We learned some things there, but we want to bring it back to center and remember that like we are strength and conditioning coaches, or we are fitness professionals. Our job is to build resiliency, and that's the ultimate injury prevention right there.
Now, also the other thing is many coaches, when the client is injured, come in injured or got injured in the game, whatever, they are so afraid to work with them. But I know that you guys are okay with that. Just the person cannot do everything, of course, and we have to use a lot of regressions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. I was just talking about this in a talk that I did yesterday about rehab. And I think sometimes coaches get scared because they think that they're like not qualified to be with someone who's injured, or they're scared they don't know where to start. But I would say the same principles that make you a great strength and conditioning coach or make you a great fitness professional are the same principles that are going to make you very good at rehab. The principles for adaptation are the same. So whenever you're scared, I would say focus on your principles. Number one, we don't want them in pain. Number two, progressive adaptation. You just might need to start a little further back on the spectrum, but you should still be trying to train them. Don't be afraid to start to build capacity, because exercise in and of itself promotes a global healing response when we're going through some sort of injury. So getting those clients back to doing things, like you said, you might need to move them back on the regression scale a little bit, but following the same like rules of progression for strength and conditioning and rehab are going to get you from point A to point B pretty effectively, as long as you just start a little bit further back.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing where people were, differentiating between everybody else and the My Boy guys was a single leg training, right? For a long time. And
yes.
And they were cracking up on, basically, let's put it this way. They were like, I don't know what they're doing. I mean, they should just squat heavy, deadlift heavy, bench press heavy, and that's it. That's easy. Now, what is your defense for single leg training?
Yeah, I mean, it just, especially when we're talking about sports or just life in general, the majority of time you're spending is unilateral positioning. There's only one true bilateral sport in the entire world, and it's rowing. Other than that, everything's done primarily on one leg. And we are, go back to the idea of functional training, we are unilaterally wired creatures. We're designed to move in contralateral patterns on one leg. And so like neurologically, we're more efficient that way. So like when you see things like the bilateral deficit where people are single leg squatting or split squatting the same amount that they could back squat, neurologically, I don't think there's any rebuttal for that. And also if you can spare the amount of load that someone's going to take on their spine, and we can train someone's legs, I don't see a reason other than, training for powerlifting, to be solely focused on bilateral strength development through squatting. So, and again, this is another development that I think just was purely out of practical use for us, because we had a lot of guys coming in after college who didn't like back squatting. Frankly, their back squats did not look good because they didn't have the shoulder mobility, they didn't have the hip mobility. And the second we put them in split squat or put them in single leg squat, the pain was gone and they were still lifting really heavy. So for us, we thought, like, again, sometimes if you're building a house and you find a better tool to get the job done, you're better off sticking with that new tool. And for us, that was single leg training for sure.
I think one of the big problems with strength training, when we say we always do this way, right? So, yes. Or we always done that way. So, okay, so single leg training, should single leg training always start after bilateral training or not? So
should always start after, you said?
Exactly.
I tend to do everything to, like, when someone's new, I'll teach them the goblet squat and I'll teach them the split squat and I'll teach a complete program for me. There's going to be knee dominant bilateral exercise. There's also going to be knee dominant unilateral exercise, and there's going to be hip dominant bilateral, hip dominant unilateral. I'm going to teach them all of these patterns because I think they're all valuable.
Pretty much at the same time.
Yeah. yeah, like continue. It's not like I say like, hey, you have to get through this to get to this. I want them to go through all of these things together, and I think we can develop those qualities concurrently.
Okay, so that was my question. That can you overlap these skills instead of saying like pretty much like in a periodization, like no, for 3 months there is no any single leg work, and when you're strong enough, now we can start implementing these things. So you don't wait, you start to overlap these skills, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's different, because many people would say like, no, you have to wait until the person is getting strong enough for single leg, right?
Yeah, the only time I have ever encountered anything where that was the case is immediately post injury. Like, so someone was coming off an ACL rehab, so maybe we had to start bilateral. But if it was a regularly healthy person, I would develop them together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And besides programming, which is a very strong part of what we do in the gym, how much you have to focus on movement quality?
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be the baseline of what we do, because like I'm not going to build a bunch of capacity on a poor quality movement. So like that's why even the program is built the way it is, from a short-term training window. Like right from they come in, the first thing we do is movement quality, right? We foam roll, we do active mobility work on motor control to get them moving better that day. From the long-term picture, it's the same thing. When they first come to us, maybe I have someone who's never trained before and they have, history of, back stiffness or hip stiffness. Maybe the first few months of the program is a little bit more time of the program is focused on movement quality and the less is focused on capacity. And then that time is going to start to shift a little bit as they start to move better, right? So I usually, when I see people in movement as medicine in the clinic, I tell them like, hey, the first few sessions are going to look more like physical therapy, where I'm doing my manual work, we're actively stretching, and then we're doing a tiny bit of strength work. And then as you come, it's going to start to look less like physical therapy and more like strength training every single time you come, because you want to start to move it from when we need to focus on movement quality to start to look at building capacity.
Mm-hmm. Now, how much the coach has to know anatomy? And I'm talking about like what you guys are calling dead man anatomy, or the functional anatomy. And the reason I'm asking you, because I know you are releasing a new book. So let's have some spoiler for that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so I want them to have a good understanding of anatomy. And it's funny, when we have coaches that come into us that might not have gone through a traditional education track, meaning they don't have a kinesiology or an exercise science degree. So typically I'll try to get them into some sort of anatomy education, whether it's through books or through courses and things like that. And I think they need to learn basic origin insertion. That stuff is helpful to understand pennation and connections and all those types of things. But then I want them to understand functionally, how does that anatomy affect what they're doing while they're on their feet? Because when a body's laying in supine on a table, it's much different than when you're standing. You get the active force of gravity and you have to deal with the dynamic segments of the body moving. So, and I think what we try to do in our internship program is take them through all the movements that we do and then anatomically teach them, why are we doing this? Like in a single leg deadlift, why is it important to square your pelvis up so you can use your glute med and load your hamstring properly and pull yourself over your pelvis and your obliques? All those little details from an anatomical standpoint, like a single leg deadlift's more than just, a hamstring exercise, right? So getting them to understand, all of those little details. And that's part of our internship and our coaching program. And that's really a lot of what is going into that book, that is my book that's coming out, Functional Training Anatomy Through Human Kinetics, later this year.
So, okay, so what is a definition for functional anatomy in this case?
I think, like I said, if we go back to the definition of functional training, I said it's purposeful training, and this is thoughtful and purposefully applied anatomy as it relates to human movement, not just as it relates to origins and insertions. So, what anatomy do we need to know to make us better what we do for a living and to make our athletes more healthy? Like, you have to understand when when an athlete runs, how does the glute work? How does the hamstring work? And how does that relate to the pelvis and the obliques and all those pelvic stabilizers, as opposed to just, the classic anatomy, someone saying, oh, hamstring flexes the knee. Well, the hamstring also eccentrically slows down knee extension, isometrically controls the position of the pelvis. It assists hip extension with the glute. All of those things really matter when we're training. And that's why, you know, a seated leg curl on a machine doesn't really do anything to help the athlete prevent a hamstring strain or get faster. But a single leg deadlift or a bridge leg curl or kettlebell swings can be very helpful as a tool, because they fit the anatomy and how it functions on the human body when we're out playing sports and living our life.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is what many people say about functional training, it's basically a three-dimensional training, right? So basically,
yeah, exactly.
this type
like
of training is, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's multiplanar, right? So like, you know, I would say that's, again, going back to unilateral training, is everything changes when you pick up 1 foot off the ground, right? So we like back squatting or goblet squatting, I mean, is primarily sagittal plane focused, which is useful. But then the second you go to a split squat, you're dealing with frontal plane stability of the hip, you're dealing with transverse plane stability of the pelvis, and all that really matters in sports. So you always think about like that exercise, that split squat might be happening in the sagittal plane mostly, but there's local stabilization happening in the frontal plane. And I think often we forget about that. If you're doing the exercise correctly and we're coaching you into the right positions, you're developing multiplanar stabilizers, which translate to sport, into life. And so that is functional training anatomy in and of itself. Those muscles working to align and position the body, especially in a unilateral stance.
So in this case, possibly the best prevention, if there is prevention, but let's say the best prevention for, let's say, ACL injuries is not necessarily leg extension or even squat in that case, but let's say single leg squat variations and then hopping and all kind of stuff on single leg, probably because that's more like towards to the activity that the athlete might do, right?
Yeah, again, so like those would be what I would call purposefully selected exercises because of their application functionally to what that athlete's going to do. So yeah, I mean, you're replicating some of those forces that they're going to see out on the playing field, and you're developing the muscles in the patterns that are going to translate to their sport. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're thinking along the functional spectrum, as we get towards unilateral, those things are going to have much more functional application than an machine-based exercise or even a bilateral exercise.
Mm-hmm. According to your client base, how many in percentage, let's say, but just a good guess, how much of them are like higher level athletes, and how much of them are like average people? They just want to move better and just traditionally losing weight.
We're split pretty down the middle. You know, probably 50% athletes and 50%, you know, regular people. And they train all together in the gym. Like they have their own groups, but they're all intermixed. And what's interesting is our training doesn't look that different between regular people and between athletes. You know, the exercise selection might differ a little bit. The intensity might change a little bit. But I put 2 programs in front of you, they wouldn't look that different. And, you know, because the application can be pretty universally applied.
But isn't that very inspiring for, let's say, average people? And the reason I'm using the Joey quote, because, you know, because those who are going to the gym are not average anymore. Let's put it this way, right? But
yeah, that's true. Isn't
that very motivating for them that technically they do the same what an elite athlete is doing?
Yeah, I think that they like it. I think when you have like someone who's like my parents' age working out, like they're in their 60s, regular people, they look over and they see a professional hockey player next to them doing the same thing. It gives them the feeling like, okay, like I'm doing something. They feel motivated, they feel encouraged, and that keeps them wanting to come back. I think the atmosphere here makes people feel young, which I think is really important, and they feel athletic, and I think that's really important. So, the atmosphere you create, the exercise you create goes a really long way.
Now, the other question is, we coaches are pretty good to put things into the one side of the scale, right? The training, the load, the volume, the intensity, we go nuts with that. Now, what about recovery, regeneration? So how do you make sure that your athletes, both sides, professional and not professional, they get the most out of the training so they start to understand recovery is important?
Yeah, there's a huge education aspect you really need to dive into, because we might see our clients 3-4 hours a week at the most, and that means the majority of their time they're not with us, and a lot of the effectiveness of what we do in the gym is going to be determined by what is happening when they're not with us outside of the gym. So starting out, the three biggest things like sleep, nutrition, and then just stress management, like how can we attack those three things with them? And so like I'll start like from a nutritional standpoint. Let's food log. Let me see what you eat over the course of the next 3 days. And then we'll pick one thing to change. Okay, maybe it's add more protein. Maybe it's shift a couple of choices around, like whether it's vegetables or adding, different types of nutrients into their meal, like one thing at a time to start to create a change. From a sleep management standpoint, a lot of our clients have terrible sleep habits. So, starting to talk to them about basic sleep hygiene, like, hey, get off the computer at night, get away from the TV, make sure you get 8 hours in bed. These little habits are very foundational, though, for them to be able to get the most out of their training. So it's about spending a lot of time in education and then trying to meet them where they're at. But then if they make a little progress, they usually see the value in how much better they feel from just a couple little tweaks in the program. So, and not everyone's going to be ready to make lifestyle changes. Some people just want to come in and train and then, go live their life on the weekend like they normally do. And then you have some people who really buy into the program and see these amazing changes. So you got to meet people where they are.
Now, of course, I have to ask about breathing. That's a given, right? But when is the point when you start to implement breathing retraining or screening or anything like that?
It's funny. It's almost become just a thread throughout the entire program, because it starts by, I find the easiest way is to coach it into all the things that we do, so that it becomes like, sometimes like if you take them off to the side and you're like, hey, we're going to work on breathing now, you can already see the clients be like, oh God, like we're going to talk about breathing. But I'm like, if I start to coach them while they're doing a plank and coach them while they're doing a swing and start to coach there, then I can start to get it to be part of what they do, right? And then I can be like, hey, why don't you come to the side? We're going to work on this exercise where you focus on your respiration, to try to get your abdominals to work the way we want, to try to get the right air exchange that we want. And it's already been kind of gone over with them. So it's just, I tell our coaches, like, weave it into how you coach planks, weave it into how you coach some of these stretches and these core exercises, and it starts to become just part of their process.
Now, I know that Mike was really critical with breathing previously, and that's another area where he completely changed his mind. So you guys been there. So was it for you guys? Was it like a aha moment to see like, okay, so it works?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, it was starting to get popular, and at that time, Brendan Rearick and myself had gone and taken a number of those Postural Restoration Institute courses, like the PRI courses, and we brought it back, and Mike was still kind of like, yeah, everybody breathes, like, why do we need to work on breathing? And so we started to use it in our therapy clinic, and we found some application there. And then Mike kind of opened his eyes to it, and then we had to find a way, how can we practically put it into our program? But when we started to really apply it into the system at MBSC, that's really when it clicked. And we figured out, okay, this is something we really need to spend more time on.
Where do you see the most benefits from breathing retraining? Or
a couple places. So one, from a postural alignment standpoint, and from a like hip mobility and shoulder mobility and neck mobility standpoint, I see big changes there. Like, I just saw somebody right before this who was dealing with low back pain, and they had a lot of just lumbar stiffness. And he's a guy whose pelvis was essentially just rotated forward. He had never took an exhale. He was always here. And so I just worked with him for about an hour before this. And for someone like that, he's like, oh my God, I can flex forward again. Like, so I see big changes in people's ability to just move with less stiffness. But then also in the weight room, teaching people how to brace and breathe correctly, it has been huge. Like getting people to understand, okay, no, this is how you create a connection with your rib cage and be able to create stiffness. That has been very big too, as a tool to teach actual strength, as well as to teach people how to just move with a little bit less stiffness. So those have been very big applications for us.
Mm-hmm. Does it change also pain threshold? What do you think?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I think the improvement in gas exchange for a lot of these people, it completely changes pain sensation for them. And just I think their joints, everything feels better because of the physiological change in gas exchange. I think they feel a lot better. I think it shows up in their conditioning as well, because they learn how to breathe correctly. They're not being total mouth breathers like this the whole time. They're starting to understand how to get air in and out. So it shows up in when they're riding the Airdyne bike and things like that as well. So I mean, it's something that I think can be woven through the whole program, and that's why I think kind of teaching it throughout is so important.
Now, regarding you mentioned the Airdyne, that's a good. I just wanted to ask about cardio fitness or cardiovascular fitness or cardio, whatever they call it. So
yeah,
where are you guys now with that? So how do you
with the Airdyne?
Cardiovascular fitness or even health?
Yeah, so I mean, what I like to do with people when they first come in is like, I got to get an idea of where they're at to improve their cardiovascular fitness. You'll have some people come in and they might seem fit, but they're high stress levels or they don't have great aerobic health. So figure out, what's their resting heart rate. I'd like to see them consistently below 60. I put them through a modified Cooper's test, as I might call it, where we put them on the Airdyne bike. His phone's ringing next to me. Put them on the modified Cooper's test and, have them do like a 5-minute time trial on the Airdyne, where I'm going to track their heart rate, like roughly around their anaerobic threshold. And then I want to see how quickly does their heart rate drop in the minute following the test. Like what's their 1-minute heart rate recovery? And I'd like to see 40, 50, even 60 beats drop in that minute. That gives me an idea of how aerobically fit they are. And then from there, I can start to figure, okay, do we need to work more on low level aerobic health, or can we start to do like higher interval work? If they can't recover in the minute following, we probably need to do more walking. We probably need to do more slow Airdyne, some strength work with a little bit more rest in between. Whereas if they can recover, then maybe I can start to do, bike intervals where we're doing like, high intensity interval work, or we can start to do sprint intervals or things like that. So I always try to figure out, where they are first. And lots of our general population people that come in, they just might have really poor aerobic health. So I'm like, outside of strength training with me, I want you to go take some walks every day and just start to get that back. And then we can start to do the like high intensity stuff that everybody usually wants to do when they come to the gym. Because that's usually what people are excited to do, but you sometimes need to qualify them for that, just like we talked about qualifying people for movement quality as well.
So in that case, when you make them, let's say, walk or just take bicycling, whatever, that is kind of like similar, like the methadone method, something like that, or close to it?
Yeah. You just, get their basic aerobic health up to par. Exactly. And that's what they've been teaching forever in that. And then that's going to support their ability to do higher intensity work going forward. They have to have some level of aerobic fitness.
Now, the other big question in strength and fitness is about strength. Like how much strength is enough, right? Because according to some people, there is not enough strength. So where do you draw the line for somebody, let's say average population, 40 years old man, no injuries. So where would you be happy? What is a benchmark where you say like, well, this guy is fairly strong?
I got it. Yeah. And so I think it's easier to talk about with general population because you're like, hey, there's no like outcome measure like their sport, right? And so like, and I'll keep getting that person strong, but like with like, for instance, I'm talking about some of my guys. I have a group of like guys who are in their 50s that I train every morning. They've been training with me for a long time. And for them, like I want them to all be able to goblet squat 50% of their body weight for multiple sets of 10. I like that. Like these guys are probably all around 200 pounds. So I'm like, all right, I want to see multiple sets of 10 with a 100-pound dumbbell. For me, that makes me pretty happy for a guy that's 50. I want to see them be able to do 20 push-ups. I like to see them be able to do, 5 perfect chin-ups where they hang all the way down, get their chest up to the bar. Like, and then those are like my kind of bilateral strength standards. But then from unilateral, like, can they do 10 single leg squats down to, an 18-inch plyo box on each side? That for me, like for someone who's in their 50s, like single leg strength and balance and hip stability is really important. So I really care about that. For farmer carry, I like to see, can they farmer carry their body weight down and back? So those are like kind of like my strength standards I'd like to see for the average general population, especially like males who are probably middle-aged.
Now you guys are in like maybe the 3rd year of running out the program?
The CFSE, yeah, we're about, it's actually longer than that now. I think it's going on 5 years, yeah.
So what is the experience so far? Because now you started to travel, you started to meet with other communities, other countries. So what was the approval rate from the coaches?
What's really interesting, you go to different countries and everyone has a different culture around strength training. So you learn a lot based on, because everyone's on a different part of the spectrum. Whereas in Europe, I feel like there's a culture of strength training with, like there's the kettlebell culture. When I was teaching in some parts of Europe, like there's a big sports performance culture, but not as much of functional training for the average person. Sometimes you go to some places and it's completely new. In Brazil, it was very bodybuilding focused in a lot of areas. And so it wasn't as much sports performance focused because it's all soccer. And a lot of these soccer players didn't traditionally want to lift weights. So you see, how it fits into their culture differently, which is always really interesting for me. Like I like to see that. And how the coaches communicate and think about strength training is based on kind of the culture they grew up in. But it's been interesting because I feel like everywhere we've gone, it has been accepted pretty well, and people have seen why there's a need for what we're teaching, whether it's for general population or for sport. I think the basic common sense approach of what we're doing connects with people kind of across the world, because I think, again, what has made this successful is practical application and it being rooted in trying to find the best way to do things. So it's been pretty widely accepted, and it's been really cool to kind of see it all over the world in different places.
In your opinion, what are the most important qualities for a coach, for a good coach, actually? So if you can name a few qualities. No, like in your head. So if you're looking for a good coach.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. One, I want to just see the personal and communication skills. Like when we hire our staff here, the number one thing, like I can teach you how to do the technical things. I can't necessarily teach you communication skills. And for you to have clients that want to be with you and for you to be able to develop programs for them effectively, you have to be able to talk. And more importantly, you have to be able to listen. So number one thing, I want communication skills. Number two, adaptability, like being able to come in that day and say, oh, well, I can't do this today, and you have to change the program. I can't tell you the amount of times I've like planned a session out and then had a client come in and they had an injury, or they weren't feeling good, or they were wanting to work on something else. And I'm like, okay, well, I got to make a change, and being able to still give them what they want and get what I want. So adaptability. And then I think you need to have number three, you have to have like a growth mindset. You have to be willing to think, how can I do this better? Like, what can I do to make this better than it currently is? And not going back to the old saying, like you said, of this is the way we've always done it. So we can't accept that mindset. So I would say personality, adaptability, and then a growth mindset where you want to, make changes.
So we know as coaches that we actually love doing what we're doing because we give so much back, right? We get so much back from the clients. So how did you survive the last 2 months? Not getting the feedback.
I'll tell you that's really what I missed more than anything, man. I'll tell you, like, I really enjoy like the communication with my clients and staying in touch with them, like seeing them every day, finding out about their life, and then them telling me how much they enjoyed training. Like that is what feeds me personally. So it was tough. Like I've done Zoom sessions, I've done online coaching, and it's good, but it's not the same as being, with the person. So, I just did the most I could. And then I tried to, I challenged myself with different projects, whether it was, you know, learning or reading or in writing, obviously the book, to try to fill that gap. But just this past week, we've started coaching outside again here, and it's been amazing because, you know, you see all the people back again and people working out in groups again, and it's fulfilling for me. So that was definitely something I missed a lot over the last like 3 months here.
What is your original background?
So I grew up in Massachusetts, just a little bit west of here. I played football and American football, and I did track and field. I was a discus thrower and a sprinter. And then I went to university. I didn't play any college sports. I went to school in Massachusetts as well. So I'm born and raised in Boston, and I played every sport. So you kind of have a perspective on all those different things. So, but I started lifting weights when I was probably 13 years old. My dad got me into lifting weights, so it's always been something I've been closely tied to, and I always kind of credit my parents for kind of instilling a love of exercise and fitness in me, because they're both so active. So like my entire life, I've kind of looked up to them, and I've gotten those habits from them specifically.
That's great. So,
yeah.
Thank you very much for this almost an hour of chat. And I wish you a success with the new book. To be honest, I'm really looking forward to read it, because
I'm looking forward to having you read it.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a great experience. And first, thank you very much for your time. We can't wait to have you guys back to Hungary very soon.
I can't wait. Yeah, thank you so much, man. I'll look forward to seeing you guys.
Likewise. And I'm very happy to see you happy as going back to real trainings.
Yeah, can't wait, man. It's been too long.
Yeah, I know. So all the best, and see you soon.
Yeah, take it easy. See ya.
Thanks.